Now, you might remember, Katie, that there was a big to-do about the fact that many of these young asylum seekers were coming into Britain some months ago, many of whom looked an awful lot older than we were being told they were. We were being told they were children, that they were being rescued from war zones, and certain people in this country said, well, hang on a second, should we not be checking precisely how old these kids are? And there was a huge kind of hoo-ha from the sort of bleeding heart Liberals types who said, no, we must let them all in, we must be welcoming. David Davies, MP for Monmouth, was slightly suspicious of some of it, and we're going to talk to him right now. David, a very good morning to you.
Morning, David.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, this story kind of is, of course, hopefully a rather rare occurrence, right, where you get somebody who's clearly pretending to be much, much younger than he really was. But to be honest, you look at a picture of this guy, he does not look 15 by anybody's standard, does he?
No, well, the problem is that this is going to be a fairly common problem because you've got a lot of people who have a vested interest in pretending to be younger than they are. Now, some of them may not have, if you like, some kind of evil motive. They may simply want to stay in the country and not be sent home. And they know that if they claim to be under the age of 18, they've got a much better chance. But, of course, the reality is that nobody dares to challenge them. If you're a civil servant or work for the local authority or a teacher, you dare to suggest that somebody is actually lying about their age, and you'll find that your career comes to an end pretty quickly. And actually, I think it was the head of immigration who pointed out that some of the people coming in from Calais were over the age of 18, but he waited until he retired. And I don't blame him, because I've been the victim of that kind of ridiculous hysteria for suggesting that some of the people are actually, frankly, lying about their ages.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. You raised this a few months ago. You said that we need to do more kind of checks and making sure that more scrutiny on these people. It's pretty fair enough from where I'm coming from that if you want to access our school system, if you want to access our benefits and you don't have any paperwork to show who you are and where you come from, that we may have to do some of those checks, as as impersonal as they may seem. Tell us more about the backlash you got when you suggested that.
Oh, absolute howls of outrage from everyone in every single political party and most media outlets. I mean, just look online at the Piers Morgan interview, which I did shortly afterwards. I was literally being chased around. Never had this. I'm a backbench MP, being chased around by angry journalists. But the reality is anyone who wants to go and talk to people who work in asylum seeker centres, as I have, privately, quietly, they'll all tell you this is happening. I actually had one guy who works in an asylum seeker centre, I'm not going to say where, and he said, well, we've got people with grey hair who will say that they're 16. Yeah. And they'll do it with a twinkle in their eyes because they know that it's going to take months and months to try and check it out and to challenge it. And the longer people can stay here, the better their chances are of being allowed to stay permanently. So it's in everyone's... All of these people have a vested interest. I don't say they're evil. I'm not suggesting, it looks like there were text messages sent to this school, but I'm not suggesting that all of them have some kind of, dare I say, sexual motive. No, far from it. But if your
15-year-old daughter, David, is sitting in a classroom with some bloke who's between the ages of 25 and 30 pretending to be a schoolboy, I don't think you'd be all that happy about it, would you?
No, I wouldn't be happy at all. I'd be quite outraged by it. But nobody dares to challenge it. I'm not saying that all of the people who are 30 are doing this because of that kind of motivation.
No, I'm not suggesting that. No, I'm not.
But I would be outraged. And the trouble is, nobody can challenge it. I mean, you watch now. As soon as we finish this interview, there'll be people on Twitter screaming outrage. How dare you suggest that anyone's lying?
Yeah, I find I get that every day, David. I wouldn't worry about it. I'm quite used to it.
To be honest, David, so I won't worry about it.
I've done it now, but the people that we need to stand up over this are people in the civil service, the immigration department, social services and education, and they don't feel they can because they know that the moment they speak out or even raise a concern, they're going to be jumped on, accused of being racist, and you don't want that going on, and so nobody says anything.
And you can tell a lot about an age from, say, dental records, so why can't we go down that route of saying to people, if you have no proof...
Yeah, but they don't have dental records.
No, I know, but we have to...
No. There's an easy test that you can do, which is done in a lot of European countries and in America, and over here, interestingly. You can tell within about 4 years how old somebody is. So if somebody looks about 21, you couldn't tell for certain if they were 18 or not, because it's only accurate about 4 years. But if they were 25 or 30, you could definitively say this person is over the age of 18.
How?
It's an X-ray to do with the teeth. I'm not a dentist, so I don't fully understand it. But nobody, the British Dental Association have said that the tests are only accurate to within 4 years. So basically, they are accurate to within 4 years, and they're widely used across Europe and in America. And funnily enough, they're actually used in this country. But the difference is that if you're an asylum seeker who's been refused an application to stay here on the basis that you're older than you say you are, then you can go along and get the dental checks and use them as proof that you're the age that you say you are. So nobody disputes the accuracy of them, but nobody wants to use them because,
so you can use them against the government, but the government can't use them to prove something against you.
That's correct.
The world has gone officially
Well, I mean,
mad.
how is it that we got here, David? Because it seems to me what you've just described, in that nobody wants to say anything about this because they're frightened of being accused of something. You know, we've reached this kind of screech politics point, haven't we? Where everything is like this now. If you say anything which is not to do with the sort of, the generally common held beliefs by the so-called noisy people, i.e. the Human Rights Brigade, that you are castigated and sort of lynched in public.
Well, I've had a more recent experiences, which is over the issue of transgenderism. Obviously, I'm all for people who are transgender should be treated with respect and dignity, never discriminated against. I honestly believe that. But I also believe that there are issues being raised here about women's safety. If somebody's physically male, has male genitalia, then they shouldn't really be in certain areas, like prisons, for example, women's prisons. Now,
how could anybody disagree with that?
Well, believe it or not, they do disagree.
I know.
Not only do people disagree, but because I held a meeting for feminists who were concerned about this, I was threatened with a police investigation by another member of Parliament for committing a hate crime. I spent 3 months being investigated by the Standards Commissioner. Right. I've been called in to see the Sergeant of Arms before the meeting even took place. And never mind what's on Twitter. I mean, the reality is that there are certain things that we're not allowed to talk about. One is the age of asylum seekers. Another one is a suggestion that perhaps somebody with male genitalia is still a male and shouldn't be in women's areas. And there are various other things as well. It's very interesting, that we think we live in a free society where we can have open and free debate, but on certain issues we can't.
The problem is that the people that do suffer are the ones that we genuinely wanted to help. Those children that are kind of 10 years old who don't have access to many things, but we, as a country, we have said that we are going to take you in. We are going to help you. We're going to help you and your family get on in life, and they suffer because there are people that are trying to jump the system, saying that they're 16 when really they're 25, 30, and the whole thing goes into disrepute. And I worry that people at home will think, you know what, let's not have anyone at any time, anything, when we are meant to be, that kind of open, tolerant country. But there's a limit. Don't push us, because otherwise we will come back.
There's no accident, I'd have to say. I don't know what you think about this, David, that there are many people now sort of moving towards the Tommy Robinson view of the world because of all of this. Because they get pushed into a corner where they feel as though their lives are under attack in some way, not just from an immigration perspective, but just from a general kind of, right-on perspective, that you're not allowed to have certain thoughts. And so naturally people will go the other way, won't they?
Well, of course, and we're sort of seeing a bit of a backlash over Brexit now because of this whole issue of the so-called people's vote. I mean, the people have already voted in actual fact. And the people who voted to leave the European Union have been denigrated. It's been said, oh, well, we shouldn't take any notice of them because they're all working class, they're elderly, or they read The Sun or the Daily Mail, and their views basically should be ignored. Right. And I'm seeing a backlash up against that because I've got people writing to me saying, I want a people's vote because the people got it wrong last time, so make them do it again. What I'm also getting is a lot of people writing to me and emailing me and saying, how dare you, all of you, including me, ignore us in this fashion, treat us in this fashion. If you dare to go against what we've democratically voted for, then there'll be consequences, some of which could be rather unpleasant. And one of the problems is that the people who have this right-on view of the world never talk to people who've got a different point of view. That's what was so surprising to them when we voted to leave the European Union. Well, I know what they're thinking because they're telling me all the time, and I see on the BBC and everywhere else. Right. They don't know what the rest
anybody else is thinking.
Well, exactly. They live in a bubble.
Well, that's exactly right. It's like all these kind of middle-class barristers tweeting each other over the course of the weekend, saying what an outrage it is that Aaron Banks is going to be interviewed by somebody on a BBC television programme. Because he's clearly a criminal, even though he hasn't been proved to be a criminal, and he should not be given the oxygen of publicity. I mean, who do they think they are, these people? They'd like to control the media as long as it says what they want it to say.
Well, they're also acting as judge and jury on a man who's not been properly investigated, let alone convicted of any offence.
And my view is, if you don't like him, which I personally don't, I have no time for Aaron Banks whatsoever, let him have airtime, because then he'll prove me right.
Yeah, exactly. He looked very shifty on the Andrew Marr show. You know what?
Everybody else will see what I see about the man. So I figure, if you are part of a open democracy, you should allow these people on telly, and then we at home, because we're bright enough, we're smart enough, we can make up our own minds. We don't need people telling us what to think all the time.
Well, you've been very kind to let me come on today and air my views, but I'm afraid that a lot of radio stations wouldn't do that.
Well, Talk Radio is a place for you, David. You should come on here more often because you talk a lot of sense and you say things that I believe in. But I tell you what worries me is that this one case that we're talking about today is merely one out of very, very many. Because if what you're describing is true, then there could be all manner of sort of 25-year-olds in schools around the country.
I had a case in the constituency which alerted me to it, which was a lad who was pretending to be 13, who was put into foster housing. He came into Cali, he was put into foster housing in Monmouthshire,
right.
And shortly afterwards assaulted somebody in the house. And he was in a house with other young children as well, even though the foster parents clearly said, look, this is a man, he's over that age. One of the adults was assaulted, so it wasn't one of the children, luckily. But you know, you can see what would have happened. And that when the police investigated, they found evidence of jihadi websites and things on his phone. And he was clearly overage. But because he'd made that claim, and this is a problem, it's not just schools. In a way, schools are a safer environment. It's foster homes, children's homes as well, where you already have vulnerable young people who don't perhaps have the parental support that you normally have in school.
I mean, do we even know how many children, and I use the word advisedly, in this particular batch that have come into the country? Because surely somebody's keeping track of all this somewhere.
Very, very hard to do it. I've tried finding out through oral questions and also finding out how many people have been challenged on it, but it's very, very difficult to do.
Right.
Nobody wants to release those figures.
Right, and I saw a very disturbing news report the other night, actually, on, I think it might have been Channel 4 News, I'm not sure, but there's now a bigger wave of people coming through eastern parts of Eastern Europe. They're now reaching the sort of Bosnia-Croatia border, where there's an awful lot of land covered in landmines. And these guys are now taking their lives in their hands by running across fields that they know are full of landmines to try and get into Western Europe. And they're all from Afghanistan, they're from Iran, they're from Libya. You know, there's no shortage of people that are still coming. And, you know, regardless of what happens during Brexit, if they get to Britain before the end of March, they're staying and they're going to school with your children.
Well, I mean, even afterwards. But the thing is, there are millions of people, hundreds of millions of people who have a much poorer life in Africa and Asia than they would have over here, even if they're on the relatively small amount of benefits that people would get if they're asylum seekers. So there's a huge financial incentive to come. If you take somewhere like Iran, I've been there. It's not a great country, but it's perfectly peaceful. It's not somewhere where there's warfare going on. So people who are leaving Iran are doing it primarily to get a better standard of living.
Yeah.
And we somehow have to differentiate between those who are looking for a better standard of living, because there are hundreds of millions of people like
Well, I'm
that.
looking for a better standard of living myself, actually. I'd like to go and sort of take myself over to Beverly Hills and get myself a Ferrari and drive around with the top down over a day of drive. But I can't do that.
But we can't. And the problem is there are hundreds of millions of people, literally hundreds of millions. I mean, Angela Merkel opened up the doors of Germany, and within a year or so, she had 1 million people coming in. And now most of that million will want to bring in lots of relatives as well. Another thing that's frustrating is that I'm always getting emails whenever the council want to build a new load of houses on some fields, right, which is fair enough. People are complaining about that, and rightly so. I can understand why. You don't want the greenfield being built all over. But some of the people complaining about it are then sending me emails saying, we're not doing enough to support migrants in this country, allow migrants to bring in all their relatives. And you think, well, hang on a minute. You're complaining
can't have cake and eat it, yeah.
Being built over the greenfield, and yet you, the same person, I mean, one of them is a Liberal Democrat candidate. In my constituency has done that. Complaining on the one hand about houses being built and say, oh, of course we need houses. We just need them somewhere else, not quite in my little rural village, please. And by the way, please do open up the barriers and allow as many people to come in as they want, because it's not fair that we stop people coming in. Just don't build an extra single house in the village that I live in. Sheer hypocrisy.
Absolutely right. And while we've got you on, Dave, before we let you go, because I know you're in a hurry, one final question. It's on the dreaded B word. Do we have a Brexit deal? What are you hearing in Westminster?
Well, I hear what I hear. I think we'll have a deal because it's in the interest of the European Union to give us a deal. I think they also need to realise, and perhaps they're beginning to understand now, that if they don't want to play that game and they don't want to give us a deal, we'll leave without a deal, because I think they're finally realising we're not likely to be bullied in this country. They didn't want us to leave. They want to continue taking our money from us and keeping us locked into this somehow. And they were being told by the Remainers and Lib Dem MPs and some Conservatives as well as Labour, well, if you give the British people a hard time, they'll cave in and they'll do what you want and they'll change their minds and they'll stay in the EU. No, it ain't going to happen. And they need to realise it. it's either going to be leave with a deal or it's going to be leave with no deal. But one way or another, we're going to be leaving by the end of March.
Tremendous. David, listen, thank you so much for your time. You're possibly the most sensible MP I've ever had on my show, so I'm going to have you back on regularly. Thank you very much indeed. David Davies, Conservative MP for Monmouth. You must know he's talking an awful lot of sense about an awful lot of things.